Picture this. A map made up of separated lines that determine where you are allowed to work, live, and thrive. And no, this is not just some random occurrence. This is a deliberate and insidious practice known as redlining. And if you haven't guessed or taken a look at the title, this issue is primarily in the US. Now, America tends to place themselves on a pedestal, and they often like to go into the world and, not everything that they do comes out right. So, now, what is redlining, you may ask? Redlining is a discriminatory practice that forces minorities into specific areas. Redlining is the denial of loans for credit-worthy applicants in specific areas. Now, in the 16th century, colonial redlining, so to speak, forced Native American peoples out of their homes by denying and stealing their resources as a means to weaken them. This practice of colonial redlining can often be seen through Thanksgiving, or thanks for giving us everything you had. Now, this colonial redlining created what we now know as the United States of America. Now, if you know a little bit about US history, conquering and weakening others is part of their strength. They have redlining so engraved in their legacy that they even added it to the American flag. Now, redlining officially started in the 1930s, but obviously through my examples, you can see that it's been going on quite longer than that. Now, this is a picture here that shows redlining in the 1920s. This is before it has officially started. It is clearly engraved in the history of the US very deeply. Now, redlining is just the child of Negro zones. Negro zones were areas that were dedicated for Black people only. These are areas that they were allowed to work and live, not anywhere else. Now, redlining. It was officially banned after the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And no, that's not a typo. It is still very much evident in US history today, and it still impacts minority communities everywhere. Now, housing discrimination, what is that? Well, it's an effect of redlining. Now, people applying for loans, when those loans are denied, they are then forced into areas that are poorer and are not suitable to thrive. When I was younger, my mother wanted me to have a good education and to, of course, have an environment where I could thrive. And that meant living in the suburbs, which just proves my point. She applied for housing applications everywhere and was quite often denied. It never came as a surprise. She applied to one house and was denied because the landowner said he did not want children. But she had other plans. She created a fake email with a Western-sounding name, and she sent in the very same application, but changed young daughter to young son, and she was immediately accepted. So that obviously proves my point that redlining is still very prevalent in American communities today. Now, if you look at this chart about bachelor degrees, this just is one impact of redlining in the American community today. It is so hard for these minority groups to succeed when they are being contained and segregated to areas that do not allow them to thrive. One prominent example of this situation is separate but equal. This was a phrase that was coined to sort of justify segregation. Separate but equal. You have separate drinking fountains, but you are equal. No. And this ideology is still very engraved in US government today. Separate but equal. The schools are separate districts, but they're still equal. That's obviously not true. There was a program in my old state, New York, where I used to live, called Urban Suburban. This was a program where urban city school students could apply and be chosen. They only picked a few, and they could go to a suburban school. How come do we need such a program if there is no redlining? Such program does not need to exist if redlining was not still an issue. So this program just shows us that even though they are trying to create this program as a front for change, it is still a very prominent issue that America is not willing to address. Now, some other issues of redlining. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of this hurricane, but Hurricane Katrina in 2005. This hurricane was in New Orleans, and the areas that were affected were primarily Black Americans. Why that is? Redlining. They forced these Black American communities to be stuck near flood-prone areas. They knew that the levees were not secure. They also knew that the infrastructure there was not adequate enough to support being near flood-prone areas in New Orleans. And that is why they blocked off these areas for minority groups. If you look at this chart, you can see the reactions. They are so different. The Black and minority communities were impacted far worse than those of the white communities, but they were still all in the same place. How ironic is that? Now, this was not just unique to Hurricane Katrina. No. This is very prevalent in other disasters as well. Now, disasters don't discriminate, so this has to be the act of the people and the government. As you can see in this picture here, other flooding and other hurricanes also face the effects of redlining as well. You can see which communities were impacted the most, and that's no accident. Here you can see this is a chart from New York, and this shows which parts have the most health issues in terms of environment and pollution and whatnot. And those areas are filled with minority groups. That is because of redlining. Now, I want you guys all to think, how can America call themselves this place of opportunity, the place to find success, and maybe the place to even have a fighting chance at the American dream, when they still let their past control so much of their present? And that legacy is still so strong. And until we address it, no one, not everyone, can ever achieve the American dream or live peacefully in the US, knowing that you are still discriminated against constantly and daily. Thank you.